movie discussion night with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Most of you know me. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education director for the museum, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending our event tonight. Tonight's movie that we are talking about is the 2014 hit, The Imitation Game. I don't know if hit is the right word, but certainly it did make a pretty good impression at the box office and with movie reviewers. This film was directed by Morten Tildum, who is a Norwegian director. I was looking at his filmography. I didn't see many, in fact, I didn't see anything except for this particular film that I recognized from him. Most of them are not in English language, so that's probably why. Also, a cinematographer is a little under the radar as well. His name is Oscar Farah, and he's a Spanish cinematographer. Once again, same thing with Morten Tildum. Not too many credits to his name in English language movies, but he did shoot a couple episodes of The Rings of Power, if you are following that series. I am, and so I'll have to go back and watch those particular episodes that he shot, which is going to be kind of nice. This film, of course, stars Benedict Cumberbatch, fantastic actor, philanthropist. It's easy for me to say. Also a great theater guy and voiceover as well. He does a lot of voiceovers. So he's got quite a lot of credits to his name. Also Keira Knightley, who I know primarily from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, but she did a fantastic job in this film, I thought. Also Rory Kinnear, Mark Strong, Charles Dance. I mean, the list goes on and on. A lot of excellent actors in this film. Filming for this particular movie began on September 15th of 2013, with production wrapping up on November 11th, so just under a month to shoot, pretty quick. Or I'm sorry, 2 months, my fault. And it was shot in Britain, and most of the actual locations that they shot at were the locations where these things actually did happen, such as Bletchley Park, the prep school that Alan Turing went to when he was a kid. So a lot of actual on-site locations that they filmed this movie at. It was produced by Black Bear Pictures, distributed by, I hate to say it, the Weinstein Company. Kind of a bad name in movies nowadays. Well, kind of, it is a bad name in movies nowadays. It's had a budget of $14 million, and it made a whopping $234 million in the box office. So kudos to them. They definitely made their money back on this. As usual, we'll just go around the room briefly and see what everybody thought of the film. Chris, you're up first on my list. What did you think?
I really liked it. I've seen it a couple of times, and it doesn't lose anything on subsequent viewings. I think it gets, in some respects, it gets even better. So I don't recall whether it won any awards. I think it did, an Oscar or two or something. 3.
Unfortunately, it did not. It was nominated for several, but it didn't win any Oscars. I think it won a couple of BAFTAs and some other European film awards, but no Oscars.
And the thing that I thought was most interesting was Cumberbatch's characterization of Turing. I mean, just capturing that character, I thought that had to be a real tough acting job. It kind of reminded me of Daniel Day-Lewis in My Left Foot. You know how difficult you get a role like that, and it's really difficult. And I just thought he did an amazing job with it.
Excellent, Lisa. What did you think?
Well, since I recommended this to us, I like it.
You better have liked it.
I've seen it a couple times. I wanted to watch it again before tonight, but I wasn't able to. So I hope I can recall. But there's just different layers to it. And the title, Imitation Game, you can look. I've recommended it to other people. My son actually was the person who first recommended it to me and said, "Hey, Mom, I think you might like this." And then I've shared it with other people, and everybody who's watched it has really liked it.
Well, we'll see about that when it comes to Sally. Sally, what do you think?
I really liked it.
All
This
right.
is my second time seeing it, and I agree with Chris and Lisa. It's multifaceted, and each time I watched it, I got a little more out of it. Plus, this time, it really meant a lot to me because I just finished the book, The Rose Code, about Bletchley Park, and I got a better insight into things going on. And
Yeah,
I stayed up till 2 a.m. trying to find out what Enigma was. I still don't get it, but I have a little better understanding of it.
the Enigma machine was basically the module that the Germans were using to encode and decode all their messages. And so that box that they kept showing in the beginning of the film, that's the actual Enigma machine. It's just a small box, but just the way that they had it set up, it was able to encode and then decode the messages. But it made it very difficult for, obviously the people of Bletchley Park, people over here in America and France, all over, made it very difficult for them to decode the cipher. And so I thought that was a really good part of the movie when they start to figure out how they're going to do that. But lastly, we'll get to Carol real quick. Carol, welcome. What did you think of the film? Yeah, okay. We'll get back to you, Carol. So the first question that I asked about the film, of course, we're going to talk about Alan Turing and Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of him. But what kind of man, does this guy seem to be? And, how does he fit into the larger picture of what's happening at Bletchley Park during this time?
Okay, I'm going to start. First of all, as a character, and as having been in education and such, I was watching him and I just thought, he is just socially off. Socially off. And I thought, I wonder if he's maybe autistic or in the autism spectrum. And I looked it up, and there is reporting that says that from, they had to take people who are studied in that to look back on information, and they believe that he probably was on the autism spectrum. So I thought that was quite interesting because it did show through in the movie.
Oh, and there goes Carol. Carol doesn't want to stay with us anymore. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I totally agree. And like Chris was saying, for Benedict Cumberbatch, I think this probably was a particularly difficult role to get into, to get down, simply because he just, he had to act, I don't want to say strange or bizarre, but
He did.
certainly he did not have normal mechanics, if you know what I mean. And it just, I don't know, it seems to me that people who are rather significantly intelligent like that, they're not like the rest of us, obviously, but they're just, like you said, off. I don't know a different way to describe it.
I think this kind of gets.
I was gonna say, oh, come on, Eric. I thought I was blending pretty well.
I think that kind of gets to Lisa's point about multiple layers. I mean, you could think of Turing as sort of an imitation of a person, or he's trying to. He's not really trying to imitate a person, but he looks like a person, but he's not acting like a person.
Yeah, kind of like an alien who came down and took over human body, right? He has all the parts and pieces, but just doesn't quite know how to manipulate to come together.
He's sort of like in that character in the series Resident Alien.
And when you said that, that was the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
So how does he? What's his role at Bletchley Park? How does he fit in with the rest of these academics and the military as well?
Not well, at least initially, anyway. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that other people saw him as just one more cog in the machine. He saw himself as better than anybody else and not being recognized for it. And you see that when he writes to Churchill, basically complaining about how the whole thing was being run.
Yeah, and I thought an interesting scene was when he went to meet Commander Denniston for the first time. And he just walked right into his office and sat down and made himself at home and waited for him. And Commander Denniston even asked him too. He goes, "Did the secretary tell you to go ahead and make a cup of tea as well?" I just thought that was a good scene, and it kind of set the tone for, you know, who he is. But we'll get into more about that. I did mention Commander Denniston just a second ago. How about him? What did you guys think of him? Not only Charles Dance portraying him, but him as a character in this film and his interactions with her.
So because I didn't watch it recently, I'm not making connections to the names.
Are you familiar with Game of Thrones?
No.
Oh, okay. Because he was in Game of Thrones too, Charles Dance was. So if you were, at least you could, you know.
Is he the one who's a little bit warmer to the character? No.
No, not at all.
Okay, he's the guy with the dark hair, tall, nice looking.
No, the guy he was tall and dark hair and nice looking. That was Stuart Menzies.
Okay.
And he was part of MI6. Commander Denniston was an older gentleman with gray hair. He was the military commander of Bletchley Park, and he butted heads constantly with him.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the term is a-hole.
Yeah,
but you know, during this period of time,
right.
You've got to factor in a lot of things.
Sure.
Especially when this guy's asking for $100,000 or £100,000 to build this machine.
Right.
During that period of time, especially during the war, that's a lot. That's a big ask.
Sure.
And you know, we see obviously that the results really aren't there for a while. So he has to be an a-hole.
I think to me the problem with Denniston was it's the old adage about, you know, the generals fighting the last war. What's going on here is World War II, I think, is probably the first information war, which is exemplified initially by Enigma. We've always used encoding of some sort, you know, but they've been kind of codes that have often been cracked kind of easily. One of the uncrackable codes appeared to be in World War II was the Navajo coders. That was kind of a unique situation. But what the Germans had done was manage to begin to turn information into sort of the digital age. Much like they kind of pioneered the V2 rockets and so on. A lot of the technology was starting to come into play here. And what Denniston doesn't realize is that he's in a new kind of war. And he doesn't understand it. So he reacts the way he reacts with he has the kind of reaction that somebody who was fighting the last war, that he thinks it's all about the guys on the field, like the infantry, the artillery, the armor, and that's the only way you win a war. I understand. I mean, I use the term a-hole kind of loosely, obviously, but I mean, from our perspective, that's what he is. But at that time, that's the only thing he knew. And dealing with somebody like Turing, who, you know, has no concept in the sense of the men on the field, they're two cultures that it's oil and water. You know, they just don't mix, and I don't know that they ever do throughout in the entire movie. I mean, Menzies seems to be the only one who kind of gets it, but even he doesn't get it entirely, I think.
Kind of speaking of what you were just talking about, Chris, I'll drop down to the bottom of the first page of my questions, and they are working with this other academic. His name is Peter, and he does remind Turing there are actual soldiers out there dying to win the war. what does this statement say about how, you know, and you hit it pretty well on the head with Dennis and Chris, but what does it say about the rest of the team? You know, these aren't the, you know, the commanders or the guys who were fighting the last war. This is a statement made by a rather young guy who's an academic trying to figure this code out along with everybody else, but he still thinks that, you know, the more important role is being played out on the battlefield by the soldiers. So how do the two come together to make this code breaking happen?
I think the team. I think that statement reflects a notion that the soldiers can't win it without them, but they can't win it without the soldiers.
Right.
That they have to see themselves as components of a larger organizational effort to win the war. I mean, they're pretty protected. I mean, these guys are the elite of the elite in Britain at this point. They're pretty. They don't seem to be caught up in pretty much in the bombardments. Bletchley Park never seems to be threatened in any respect.
Yeah.
So they're all kind of isolated from what's going on in the real world out there with that Denniston has to deal with. But I think there's also this recognition as Peter comes through, who does know something. I think, as I recall, he was the one who had a brother out there on the ship. So he's got a direct connection that these others don't seem to have. So he recognizes that they're part of a larger team, I think.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Just having that connection, people have different perspectives, and when you have a familiar connection like that, it really plays differently. I'm just going to tell real quick, like there's a pipeline going across the Midwest. There's people who are like 50 miles from it, and they have no clue what's going on. But the other people are like frantic, trying to figure out all the safety and all of this, and they're all connected, and it's like a whole different little world. And now that the people 50 miles away are just finding out, oh, we might be targeted with eminent domain and such. And now all of a sudden they're in on the learning curve and they're feeling it. And I think that when it doesn't touch you, I know that they're part of the war and they're trying to, but I think they're more in the academic part of it, and they don't really relate. They haven't been in the military. They don't really relate with that. They're just relating to their abilities and their research and that. And so that one gentleman with the brother in there, he brings in a little different perspective, but I don't know if they're able to feel it, but they can't, because it's more than just that relationship. It's a bigger war than that.
I think you kind of get to that point at the end of the movie where they've succeeded in breaking Enigma, and then the war ends, and they're sitting around and going, well, what now? And they're all saying, well, I guess it's back to university. Like this was just kind of a minor interruption in their careers, whereas for other people it was life and death.
Yeah. And Chris, you mentioned earlier about how, you know, especially with Denniston, the generals are always, you know, fighting the last war. And World War II was kind of like the first, you know, technological war. Do you think that we have progressed to the point where the people who are not on the battlefield still feel like they're part of the team, and that they are playing a vital role, especially when you're looking at drone operators and intelligence collectors and things like that? Do you think that we've moved past this? If you're not on the battlefield, you're not contributing kind of mindset?
I think to a certain extent we've moved beyond it, but maybe not in a good way.
Right.
I think we may be more, it may be easier for us, the more technological it gets, the more removed we are from actual, you know, bayonet to bayonet or rifle to rifle. The farther we get away from that, the easier it is to sort of discount what is actually happening out there, the damage that's caused to people on the ground. It's like, does the B-52 bomber have the same perception of his impact on the war as the grunt in the foxhole does?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's funny you should this question, because I actually just spoke recently to a couple young drone pilots, and they feel important. They feel like they're pilots. They feel like they're part of the military. But when you ask them specifically about what they're doing, it becomes very flat and I know the cliche, but like a video game. It's very detached.
Yeah.
And it's very isolated. They're kind of by themselves most of the day, and it's very isolated.
But you said that they still feel part of the team, though. They still feel a sense of that they're contributing.
They do, and it might be just that they're young, but I didn't feel that they had the same. I've been family members in the military my whole life, and it just didn't feel like they really comprehend the whole military in the way that I felt it growing up. It feels just like, and they're very, I mean, pilots get a lot of benefits. I mean, they do important jobs. The drone pilots get most of the same benefits too, and they go and it's almost like cleaning teeth or something. They go and do that, and then they're off at a certain time, and it's quite different. It's quite different.
God, excuse me, my throat is super dry for some reason. It's because I had to turn the heater on because it got cold again. We're starting to kind of maybe veer toward the philosophical. Let's kind of recenter back on some of the characters. I did want to bring up Joan Clark as well. Let's talk about her for a minute. What did you think of her character? What was her? I mean, I was kind of confused about her character a little bit.
Mhm.
She was very interested in what was about to be offered to her through this crossword puzzle contest, and then going and sitting in this room with all these men. She's the only woman there, so she's obviously kicking down doors and overcoming obstacles. But then when she's actually offered the job, she can't do it because she doesn't want to disappoint her parents, and she needs to get married and live this, regular humdrum life that I guess has been drilled into her since she was a child. But how do you think she comes to grips with both of those sides of her, and moves forward with the project at Bletchley Park?
She needs something to bridge her two worlds. And I think what Turing manages to do is give her a way to do that. Because I think ultimately her real goal is to be her own person. I mean, she's obviously extremely bright and wants to take advantage of it, wants to see the benefit she can obtain from it, and also to contribute. But her parents, she's still got that tie to her parents, who are very traditionally oriented. And so I think that Bletchley Park is a way for her to escape that, but she still is ambivalent about doing it. And I think that plays throughout this whole thing, especially when it turns out that Turing, of all people, has to offer to marry her in order to get her to stick around.
Yeah, that was odd.
What was that, Sally?
I said that was so odd to me. That whole getting engaged to Turing thing was just peculiar. I know they were very close friends, and I think they admired each other's intelligence, but there certainly didn't appear any romance involved.
Yeah, and certainly from Turing's side of it. Although I guess we'll jump into this right now. She says that when he tells her that he is homosexual, and she's like, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we both we connect on other levels. Maybe not the physical level, but certainly on many other levels. And then Turing turns around and says, but I never really cared for you. But earlier in the film, he's telling, what's his name? Oh my gosh, I've completely forgot this character's name now. I have to look.
Is that Hugh?
Hugh Alexander. He tells Hugh Alexander that he really does care for her, and that he can't imagine not only working without her, but he really wants her in his life. So which is it? Which do you think he really meant?
I think he did care for her, but if he truly was autistic and such,
Yes.
like that's something that he cannot feel in certain ways. Or express maybe. It's just like his engagement with the other men. He didn't comprehend some of the nuances of the things that they were saying or doing. It didn't make any sense to him. I can't remember what it was. Like, was it the sandwiches? Something about sandwiches?
Yeah. Everybody's going to go get lunch. And they didn't ask him specifically, do you want to come with us to get lunch?
Right.
And that's what he was waiting for. He was waiting for that specific ask to him to join them. And I thought that scene was really clever. And I thought they did well on setting Alan up for the audience by showing how, once again, I don't know the right word, I don't want to offend anybody, but how kind of off he is. Socially awkward.
That's autism, and it's a big spectrum. Like, it can be like very obvious and dramatic. It can be on the high end where there's just a few things that are off, and you can function quite well, but you just really cannot completely fit in, and people pick up on that. And so I think he was grappling with the homosexuality and the autism. And typically when you have certain conditions, there's other comorbidities that you don't even realize that are playing into things as well. So I think at one time he tried to push her away, though, on purpose, intentionally, to say he didn't care. But I think he appreciated her, but he just didn't know how to fit her into his whole scheme.
I thought the sandwiches thing was kind of interesting to me, in part because I thought it was not just a matter of autism. It was a matter of, here was somebody who, even if he hadn't been autistic, took everything so literally that it just struck other people as odd. And it reminded me of somebody I know who went to a doctor at one point for some issue, and the doctor said, "Can you wiggle your toes?" And the person said, "Yes." And the doctor waited and then said, "Oh, will you wiggle your toes, please?" And this person is definitely not on the autism scale at all. And so to me, that scene was a little more ambiguous than it might have been to some other people who might not have had the experience that I had with this person. I think I think those on the autism spectrum, like the way Turing was, the literalness is part of that, being on that spectrum. But I think the literalness can also be something that is separate from the autism itself.
I was curious, when he basically shunned Joan. I was wondering if perhaps he was maybe looking out for her best interest. He knows that some of the things he's doing are, there's a chance he's going to get him in trouble here, before too long. and he doesn't want to put her through that. So like Lisa said, he pushes her away, maybe in an effort to just to protect her, I suppose, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's the right take on it or not. But I was kind of confused though on why he would go through all this, why he would express his feelings for her to other people, offer to marry her, and then basically turn around and say, "I never cared for you. Go away." Go do something.
That's how I took it, that he was protecting her, and I felt that that was his way of caring, in his odd way of caring.
Right.
Well, the thing that he really cared about the most was his machine, Christopher, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah.
How does Turing's approach to cracking Enigma with Christopher, how does it differ from his colleagues? Or does it differ from his colleagues?
I think his colleagues were going at it in a more, what at that time would have been a more standard cryptography kind of way of trying to figure out what's the key, where if we can break this little key, then we're going to be okay. What they didn't understand was how difficult it was going to be to break that key, and I think that's what Turing understood. Was when they figure out that Enigma could set up 159 trillion different possibilities. Okay, how do you break through 100? And then there was a voiceover at one point that said it would take 200 years for somebody to just break the code once.
Yeah, a team of 10 men working every day. And 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah, it would take them 200 years.
Right. And what Turing seemed to understand was that there had to be a way, sort of an Occam's razor way of dealing with this, that cut through all these possibilities and find some underlying sequence or some underlying theme that could be used to simplify the entire decryption mechanism. And I mean, he didn't know what it was until that event at the bar, where all of a sudden he realizes all we need to do is find out what these messages are that they send each time, and that can help us cut through the clutter. Trying to find the signal in the noise.
And I didn't, yes, I got the whole movie the first time, but I did not catch that until I watched it the second time. I realized how important that scene was, and how crafty it was. It wasn't like in your face. It was important and it was significant, but it I don't know. I just thought it was well done. Yeah,
I mean, just the idea that the Wrens, as they call them, as they were known as, felt a little bit of a affiliation there. That they could discern who they were dealing with by the signature of the way they tapped out the code, sort of like handwriting, uniqueness of handwriting, and that was what Turing understood, that that the uniqueness was the weakness in this whole thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad, Chris. I'm glad you said 150 trillion, because I was really put off every time they said, what was it, 150 million.
Yeah, 159 million. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Why can't you just say trillion?
Yeah, right. It's a British thing.
Yeah, I guess. Let's talk about Stuart Menzies real quick. He is the MI6 representative, I guess, to Bletchley Park. It didn't seem to me that he was the head of MI6. This MI6 is a relatively new office in the military intelligence department for Britain, so much so that when he says he's from MI6, everybody's like, there's only 5 offices in MI. How can he be from MI6? And he's like, exactly. what did you think of him and his character and his role in all of this?
He was, didn't he, wasn't he kind of, he was traitorish, right?
No, this is the guy who took Turing's letter to Churchill.
Oh,
He was,
okay.
my dog's over here snoring ridiculously loud. So yeah, he was kind of the younger guy. He was
Okay.
the tall, good-looking guy working with Commander Denniston, and kind of, I don't want to say in charge, but he certainly had some swagger to the whole project. That's for sure.
He's Mr. Savile Row.
Yeah, I don't
I don't get that reference at all.
Oh, Savile Row is the high-end tailors. And
Oh,
I mean, he was always very, very well dressed. I thought he was kind of a mystery figure throughout the whole thing. I mean, he seemed to understand the importance of Turing, but at the same time didn't really come to his defense as much as you would have thought that somebody would. And then at the end, you realize that he's been playing the group all along by actually planting. Who was it? Was it Hugh or I forget who
no,
it was?
it was Karen. This right here, John Cairncroft.
Yeah, he planted the Soviet spy in the group, and you're going, okay. It's sort of like the imitation game could have been called the imitation secrecy game,
yes.
because everybody's playing with secrets. The whole project is secret, and there's secrets within the secrecy project. And Menzies has got this enormous secret where he's not telling anybody that they're being spied on. So he was an odd but kind of interesting character, I thought.
So he's not the guy who broke in and to the girl's room and got in her face aggressively, and that's not who we're talking about.
He did break into Joan's room, but I don't think they, if I remember correctly, they didn't show any interaction between him and Joan.
Right.
He was in Joan's room. He was reading
So that's
the
who I'm
Enigma
talking
messages that Turing had brought her.
about. Yeah. So
when
in the
Turing
end,
questioned-
in
Sorry,
the
go
end, he was spying and stuff, right? Well, he was involved with spying, right?
He, like Chris said, he planted the Soviet spy into the group.
Right.
Because he wanted to basically control what information was being sent to Stalin. And by putting someone in there that he could control more or less, that means he can control the messages going back to Russia. He was
a very deceptive character.
He was crafty.
Yeah, I do agree with Chris, though, that I think that that's part of the name, the imitation game, is that they're all of these little underlying games that are going on that are secret and mysterious.
I mean, in that scene in Joan's room where he's looking at all the documents and he's saying that she'll spend all this time in prison and she won't be back. She's already in basically a dark site for all practical purposes.
Yeah.
And Turing is just, really doesn't know what to do. And then in the end, he says, "No, she just went to the market. She'll be back." So he has no problem lying to the people that are working for him. No problem lying to the enemy. He's cold and calculating, really, when it comes right down to it.
He had no problem lying to his own people. And when I say his own people, I mean his superiors, Churchill and whoever was in charge of MI6. And even said as much. I thought
I didn't care for him, but I didn't care for him, but I thought he did well at his role in the movie.
Yeah, and I was kind of, and that's that's Mark Strong. That's who that actor is. And every film that I've seen Mark Strong in, I always thought he was an American. And I don't know, maybe he still is, but maybe he just put on a really good British accent. But I don't think so. I think he's British and he's always just putting on a good American accent. Matter of fact, I just watched Zero Dark 30 last night, and he's one of the he's not the head of the CIA, but he's one of the higher ups in the CIA. And I really like his character in that one too. He just chews everybody out because they're not making any progress. And so to go back and forth between those two and see him with this British accent or hear him with this British accent, I thought that was I just thought that was kind of cool. It's just one of those little things that kind of tickle my fancy a bit. Well, we certainly did not go along my list of questions in order, so I'm kind of out of sorts on where I should go next.
Something I want to mention, which doesn't have anything to do with the question you asked, but there comes a point where Turing says, "Oh, you read my paper, the Imitation Game, literally." I went out and looked it up online, and what really surprised me was that there's almost no mathematics in it. It's basically a rhetorical or a text explanation about what the thinking machine would be and what the objections to it and how he would overcome the objections. So I thought for somebody who was on the autism spectrum, who's really into mathematics, that this paper would be impenetrable to anybody outside that discipline. But as I looked through it, I thought basically any reasonably intelligent person could read this and understand what he was talking about.
Yeah, and I think when he was, they kind of hit on that a little bit as well when he's having, the interview with the police detective, Rory Kinnear, who I thought was another good role in this film. And they're playing the game. You have a judge and somebody that you ask questions to, and the judge has to decide, is this a person or is this not a person? And I kind of had to pause the movie there a little bit and kind of think through what he's trying to get at there. Obviously, he's extremely intelligent, but to be able to start, especially during this period of time, looking at those differentiations and like you said, Chris, with the paper as well, how do you overcome some of those barriers? How do you overcome some of the negative aspects of what could possibly happen when you start creating these thinking machines? And we're living that right now. We have AI around us 24/7, and nobody knows if it's going to be a good thing for us or if it's going to destroy us in the next couple of weeks.
Well, the people that create the AI don't even know how it works.
Yeah.
Once they create it, it's basically out of their control. Arnold Schwarzenegger lives as T2.
I just want to get this in. I just think with I love the way the movie started. I love the way that it ended. There's such intensity in those issues that are going on and it was heartbreaking. Then there's the war, then there's the machine, and all of the relationships. It is just so layered with so much that was compacted in that movie, but unfolded so well. I just really appreciated it.
Yeah, it wasn't like it was, you see a lot of movies that have all those layers and it really becomes complicated. And it's like they're almost trying too hard, to throw you off the scent, so to speak, by throwing in all the other factors. And it can get kind of confusing and almost to the point I've seen this, time and time again, where I just don't want to finish the film because they're just trying to do too much. And they're not doing it well. So I agree with you, Lisa. They did a lot, but they did it very well. They unfolded it nicely. They made it easy for you to understand what's happening. I agree wholeheartedly.
But like, he lost his life because he was homosexual, which is huge. But yet, how that was balanced in the whole movie, it wasn't like heavy. I mean, it was there on both ends, but I don't know. I just really liked the movie. So
I was really surprised. I didn't know about the laws in Britain during this time. What they could do if you were a homosexual, that they could do anything at all. It never registered with me. So at the end of the film, I was shocked, saddened, and I definitely walked away, not feeling very good about, just how people treat people in general. And then to force him to go through chemical castration or go to jail. And it's like, oh my God. I couldn't wrap my head around that. It seemed like they were making this up. I know they're not. I know this was really happening, during this time, and it really did happen to this guy. But it just seems so fantastic.
And the reason he chose the chemical castration was because he was in love with this machine.
Yeah, he did not want to leave that machine at all. That was, and I don't know. I really, maybe I shouldn't ask this question. In fact, I won't. We're not even going to go there because we'll be talking for another 2 hours once we start going down that.
I was going to say, I thought that they did a nice job with the flashbacks too. Yes. A lot of times when you flash back, you kind of lose this continuity of the movie. But I thought that the flashbacks here worked really well. It was well paced, and they brought it up at the point where it made sense to understand what was going on in the present.
Yeah.
And the time period scenery was great too.
Yeah, I think I did ask the question, if I'm not mistaken. I did. Period films, I asked, must have detailed attention paid to so many aspects so the film works or doesn't work, depending on how much attention you pay. So in this instance, we have a really good collaboration between the production designer, the set decorator, and the cinematographer. You don't always see that much collaboration in the film, but for this one, they brought this whole team in together to make sure that this period film did work. And so I'm glad you brought that up, Lisa. Apparently you feel it did work. Anybody else want to comment on that?
My question is, so many people who worked at Bletchley Park had to sign you could never talk about it agreement. I don't know what they call it. I forgot the name.
Well, we would call it a non-disclosure agreement today. Yeah.
Non-disclosure. Yeah, they had to sign some agreement that they would never, ever divulge that they worked there, anything about Bletchley Park. So my question is, how authentic is the scenery in that if nobody could talk about it? I know there are people who broke the agreement and talked way after the fact, but I'm just curious.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that they mentioned early in the film, and maybe they did this on purpose to kind of cover that aspect, was that everybody was kind of compartmentalized. You have this group of people working on this thing over here, and they don't interact with these people working over here. So you don't always, you don't ever get the full picture of what's happening unless you're in this touring. At least that's the way I saw it. Chris, Lisa, what did you think?
Well, go ahead, Lisa. I was just going to say, I mean, it took them 50 years to get this story out.
That's true.
I think it was just eventually. I mean, you can only conspire so long to keep something secret.
Right.
And there's more.
And I think there was a time limit.
There might have been. I don't recall that, but
I can't remember either.
Yeah. In any event, at some point, no matter how secret something is, I think it's eventually going to come out. And once that first thread gets pulled, you start to pull the whole sweater apart and find out what's underneath. And I think that's what happened here. Whether it's the atomic bomb or any other technological advance or any other secret that people want to keep, eventually you're going to get the story. And it took 50 years here, and it might have just been a matter of ultimately the government deciding, particularly in light of what happened with Turing and what was happening with computer technology at the time and Turing's influence on that people started talking about what Turing had done during the war, which ultimately would have led to a lot of questions about, well, what the hell was he doing, and what the hell was the government doing? So the government comes under pressure. I mean, I don't know if that's the way it happened, but to me, that would be the dynamic that would be pretty likely to have happened.
I must say that the scenery and the things they talk about in Imitation Game is very similar to a BBC series called Bletchley Park, and similar to several books I've read. So somebody must be talking somewhere because they match.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of deviation.
This is all pretty much historical fact. And I think, you see a lot of films that try to deal with historical fact, and just for entertainment purposes, they do have to stretch things here or there, or create scenarios that didn't really happen. I found this to be pretty spot on. Of course, I can't speak to the relationships, that were happening within the group dynamic. But just as far as, the larger picture, one thing I did notice though, is that they brought this whole movie to a close with them being able to decode the Enigma machine. And that really did happen. But I know at some point, the Germans put a fifth wheel into the Enigma machine because they were suspecting that it had been cracked. And so they wanted to, up the intensity or the difficulty of being able to crack their code. They didn't deal with that at all in the movie. I noticed, unless I missed something. So there was that fact that they did just kind of skip over. And maybe that's just to make, the transitions and the layers in the movie itself work without adding, too much complexity.
I think that's you got to kind of have a focus, and if just like you didn't want to ask your question because it could go out and out. If you keep opening all these little boxes, it can go out and out. And I think that's kind of like the movie Boys in the Boat. There were a lot of criticisms like, oh, they didn't deal with Hitler, they didn't deal with this, but it was a nice feel-good movie if you haven't seen it. Boys in the Boat, it's still playing. I would recommend it. It's about the rowing team going to the Olympics. But like I said previously, last movie, I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, Napoleon, and Oppenheimer, and I did not like any of them. I thought they were
Really?
awful. Yes, I just felt so flat and not connected. But like this, I'm a very feely person, empathy and stuff. So like this movie pulled me in. There was a lot to pay attention to. So it was on a different level than those other movies for me.
I enjoyed Barbie.
I used to see it.
Anyway, I had a couple of points I wanted to make other than Barbie.
You don't look like the Barbie type, Chris.
I know, I don't. But it's a great satire too. I don't know if anybody has seen it, but they open up with a scene that's very it's an encomium to 2001 with the apes around playing and tossing the bone up. If you see nothing else, see the opening because it's really hilarious. But in any event, I want to say about the production or the set decoration that the scenes where the post-bombing scenes on the streets, where you had all the rubble and everything, I was just stunned by how much that was my impression of what it would have looked like. And I was trying to figure out how they did that, unless they did that with CGI and did a but it didn't look like that was done with CGI. The other thing was the moral issues that arose in this movie were really, I thought, pretty intense. Sort of beginning with the question, that Peter, where really first arises with Peter and his brother on the boat, and then they get to the whole discussion about how much can we tell people, how many of these exercise, how many of these various encounters between the enemy can we predict and tell people about to avoid without also disclosing how much we've cracked Enigma. And you actually saw them doing the calculations on paper about how to balance that equation. And I just wondered how people dealt with that realization that they were condemning people to death, knowing that they could have saved their lives.
That is one theme that profoundly disturbed me in all these books I've been reading about World War II, Bletchley Park, how we actually knew attacks were going to take place by the Germans, and we didn't tell anyone, and lots of civilians died. I just was devastated that that actually happened. I couldn't believe we actually planned that. We let it happen.
And not to sound, cold and callous, but it was necessary. Quite honestly, I thought it was a brilliant aspect of the movie that they brought that, into it as well. And like they said in the film, they're absolutely right. If you start reacting to every, tip or message that you get, they're going to figure it out awfully quick.
Mm-hmm.
And even Stuart Menzies at the end of the film, once the war was over with and he's dismissing them, back to academia, he says, you still can't tell anybody that we did this because there's going to be another war. There's going to be more encryption to be done. And if they know that can already figure this out, they're just going to create something else. But if they don't know, maybe they'll still rely on what they had before, and we've already got it cracked. I definitely asked that question in here. It's a tough decision to make. What I thought was interesting was that they decided to make that decision internally all by themselves, and they didn't tell Deniston, and only later did they tell Menzies, simply because he kind of forced it out of him. But it almost, and I know it's not, but it almost seemed traitorous that they didn't go and tell their superiors that they had cracked this code and figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you have Menzies at the end saying, okay, we're done, burn it all.
All of it.
And then you have that scene of them throwing all the papers into the fire and so on. And the thing that struck me about that scene where they're actually burning it was I was thinking, yeah, you get book burning in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
We are starting to run low on time here. I'm going to ask just two more questions. The first question goes back to kind of the filmmaking aspect. And I was curious, with the subplot of the police investigation and how they kept going back to that and talking about his homosexuality and how it affected his life after the war, do you think the film could have stood on its own without those subplots? Or do you think that was an integral part of, how the film unfolded and what it meant at the end, the impact that it made?
I think it had to be integral, because I don't think you can show the tragedy of Turing without having that subplot going on. I mean, I thought it was interesting when the detective gets to the end and he says, he's not a spy, he's a poof.
Yeah.
As if, and which created sort of an equivalency almost. That a poof, a spy, what's the difference? We still need to investigate them, which then brings you to the ultimate tragedy, the chemical castration and the ultimate suicide.
I agree with Chris. I was going to use the word serious. There was a whole other level of seriousness that would have been left out of the movie. Not that the topic wasn't serious, the Enigma machine and all of that, but the way that the scene with the Chris's word tragedy, the tragedy of it was brought to the film, and it brought a lot of meaning, extra meaning. So
It was really kind of like a Greek tragedy, literally, because Greek tragedies depend on a heroic or noble figure who's deeply flawed. And that's what you get, I think, out of Turing. But you also get that to a certain extent out of others in the movie but they aren't as heroic or as noble, but they all have their flaws too. And all those flaws come to bear in a very negative way on Turing himself and basically make his flaws even more unbearable for him.
Yeah, I think they made a conscious decision to tell the story of Turing, not the story of the cracking of the Enigma machine or World War II, but the story of Turing. Now, these other parts fall into it, but the movie is not about, cracking this code or winning the war. The movie is about the man himself. And like you said, Chris, the tragedy within. Last question I'm going to ask tonight. My famous favorite question to cap off the show. who was your favorite actor and why? Sally, I'll start all the way at the end with you.
I wanted Cumberbatch to win that Academy Award so bad for his acting, but I knew he wouldn't. I knew that Eddie Redmayne was going to get it because his acting and portrayal of Hawkins was superb. So, but I really did like Cumberbatch, and I thought he, like Lisa said, he sucked you in. You couldn't let go of that character.
And I would, your last statement there, Lisa, I know you'll completely disagree, but I would relate that to Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer. That character just sucked you right into the movie. It just he was, you didn't have a choice. You were going to be a part of everything that was going on, whether you wanted to or not. You may not like it, Lisa, but you were still sucked into it. And the way you described Cumberbatch's character like that, that's the impression that I got. Lisa, who was your favorite character?
Cumberbatch. I thought that was just, there's certain roles that you cannot imagine people pulling off, and he was just outstanding in every part of the movie. So all of his interactions, his academics, the whole tragedy at the end, everything about it, just a phenomenal acting job.
Chris?
Yeah, I would go with Cumberbatch too. This was a performance that I think makes it impossible for anybody else to do touring.
Yes.
There's certain roles, certain characters that I've seen over the years where you say, okay, you cannot do another movie about this and cast somebody else in that role. I think of All the President's Men with the guy that played Ben Bradley, Jason. I can't remember his name.
Robards?
Pardon?
Jason Robards?
Jason Robards. Yeah, I can't think of Ben Bradley without thinking of Jason Robards. And so if somebody else did a movie about the Washington Post during that era, I mean, if you had somebody playing Ben Bradley, I'd be saying, where's Jason Robards? But I also, it was really the next one in line to me would have been Keira Knightley. I mean, I thought she did a terrific job in her role. And again, I can't imagine somebody else playing Joan Clark if they were to try to redo something like this.
Before Eric goes, I just want to say that team that worked on, I thought they were great too. I thought the banter and everything about it was well done.
Yeah, and excuse me, definitely. And I did have a question about, what did I say? To comment on the group itself. And you can see, and this is partly due to a good job by the director, certainly good job by the actors as well, though. But you could see how their relationship and their chemistry grew over time from, almost mocking each other when they first met to all the other scientists saying, well, if you're going to fire him, you're going to fire me too. They really came together as a group. And that bond that they formed throughout the film was evident, and it was really well portrayed.
I'd just like to add, if you get a chance, just go out and do a Google search for the original Imitation Game paper that he wrote. You can find it on a PDF. It's only 20 pages long. I mean, you would have thought that this might have been a 50-page or something like that. It's only 20 pages long. It's not. There's almost no math in it. And even if you don't read the whole thing, I think you really get a good sense of just how brilliant he was to be able to reduce this complicated issue into a text paper that basically any intelligent person could understand.
And only 20 pages.
Only 20 pages.
When they were talking about it in the film, I imagined something way more intense than that.
Yeah, no, it's 20 pages long.
For my favorite character, I'm going to go with Mark Strong, Stuart Menzies. He didn't have a huge role in the film, but every time he was on screen, I just felt something was going to happen, whether it's good or bad, either way. But when you saw his face on the screen, you're just like, oh, okay, we're about to be throwing a curveball here. Something's going to happen. Something's going to elevate this film to just a little bit more than it was 2 minutes ago. And I don't want to say I got excited every time I saw him, but I certainly was a little more interested. I leaned forward a little more, pay a little more attention to what they're saying. So I'll go with Mark Strong.
Okay, you can be wrong.
You know what? Look at my last name. Don't let it fool you, buddy. Don't let it fool you. Our next movie discussion night will be in April, and we will be looking at the 2009 Quentin Tarantino film Inglourious Basterds. What a fun watch!
Oh, good.
If you haven't seen it, it's a lot of fun, I think. And there's certainly a lot to unpack in that film. And then our next one after that is going to be in June. And we're looking at, it wasn't a theatrical release. It was a TV movie called Ike, Countdown to D-Day with Tom Selleck.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's the one that we're going to be watching in June. Those should be up on our webpage very shortly. We're having a little bit of issue with adding events to our webpage, but we're working through that. And I think we should have that figured out hopefully by next week. So look forward to those being posted. And until then, I wish everybody a fantastic weekend. If you are up here in the frozen tundra, have faith. It's going to be 50 again by Sunday. I don't know what it's like down there in Texas, Lisa, but I hope it's nicer than this.
I think it was 88 today.
Oh.
On that note, goodbye.
Thank you for doing the discussion on this movie, Eric.